But it's important to talk about a much more painful history layered beneath that. For thousands of years before anyone else, this was the ancestral land of the Cherokee people. I went to Gatlinburg, Tennessee last week. Most people think of this destination for the attractions, and that can be a hoot, especially for families. But lucky for me, it was peak leaf peeping season, and woo, the Smokies did not disappoint. They put on a show. By the way, did you know that the Smoky Mountains are the only free to enter national park? Well, of course, the loophole is that you have to pay to park, but that's a nice fun fact for you. Anyway, one morning we went into the forest, an easy hike on Old Settlers Trail. We were embarking on a forest bathing experience. Yes, it sounds very woo-woo, but our amazing guide, Kendall from the Smoky Mountain Guides, eased us into explaining why something like this is important. It's not just woo-woo, it's actually necessary. The whole point was to step away from the day-to-day, slow down just to be present. It's a way to reconnect to nature because, we are nature. So much of the hike was just walking slowly, using all of our senses, stopping, observing. We weren't racing to some waterfall or the summit. We were looking for animal tracks and feeling plants, getting reacquainted with nature like our ancestors did. We bushwhacked a bit to go off trail and deeper into the forest. And then we were given the challenge to sit. Okay, so this is where you may think it gets a little crazy. I'm going to share something that I experienced in the forest. I sat by a tree and I looked at it, the one in front of me. I had my back to another one. Then I felt the tree behind me sort of calling me to give it attention. And so I did for a while, and I was looking up at it, how tall it was, how grand it was, the texture. I felt the bark. It felt warm, and I was surprised about how warm and cozy it kind of felt. I didn't expect that. The moss was delightfully soft, like a perfect astroturf. I guess astroturf was inspired by that texture. Then I felt that initial tree that I was looking at kind of call me or want my attention again. Guys, it was magical. This wasn't creepy. No, we weren't high. We weren't on drugs. Just tuned in, off the grid. So the longer I sat, then I started noticing all the trees around me, the little trees that were closer. And it kind of felt like, it's hard to articulate, but it kind of felt like they were comforting me, like surrounding me in a bit of protection. Not quite a hug, but like hovering. I don't know. It felt really nice. So then after that, we were eased out of this sort of meditation, but still silent. We danced in the forest. So if you were walking by on the trail and saw us off grid and saw a bunch of us dancing in the forest, I can imagine that you would think the witches are back. That part's not on camera. But then Kendall took us to the most fairyland looking group of boulders. It was kind of like in a dried out part of the creek. And then moss grew over it. And that's when we took off our shoes and played around them. A little parkour, a little bit of acting like a kid, jumping across, slipping and falling, teetering across the boulders. Guys, when do we ever get to do something like this? So eventually we made our way back to the trail. And then we met up with Elizabeth from Open Heart Yoga, where we had the most relaxing session by the water. Okay, I know this is a bit of a long story of this journey, but I can't help but think about the history of this land. So bear with me a little longer. Here we go. The trail itself is called the Old Settlers Trail. That name tells part of the story of the Appalachian families who lived here in the 1800s. Right up into this land was taken to create the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in the 1930s. Every once in a while in the forest, you can still see bits and pieces of the homes and old stone walls and chimneys hidden amongst the trees. But it's important to talk about a much more painful history layered beneath that. For thousands of years before anyone else, this was the ancestral land of the Cherokee people. This river, these mountains, this was their lifeblood. And this was part of the Trail of Tears in the 1930s. The Cherokee were forcibly removed from this very land, marched away on the Trail of Tears. So now back to me sitting there in the forest by that tree, feeling a sense of peace and connection. I just was very curious as to the peace and love I felt, despite the land being a place of profound loss, pain, and injustice. I still appreciate the magic and gifts I felt from that forest that day. But I'm still curious about how I can feel so much love undeniably amongst the layers of the ghosts that live there.